If you look at the beginning of humanity, it was essentially migrating out of the trees. I mean, we're talking about like human ancestors living in trees, migrating out of the trees onto the prairie because of deforestation. That was just natural, relatively natural deforestation that was happening. And then learning to live on the prairie, learning to develop tools, um, hunting, developing technology, all that stuff. Then you had Stone Age, Bronze Age, Iron Age, Industrial Revolution, Information Age. I mean, that's where we are now. A little bit after the Information Age. But during that, somewhere between like Industrial Age and Information Age, the modern concept of what education was in the whole, it's not just like the education that you get when you go to school, but like the parameters of what a normal person does in life was sort of developed. um, and the parameters were that you go to school and then go to college and then you have your job. And the school was set up in a particular way. Essentially, I'm not saying it was a big conspiracy to set it up like this, but it just got set up like this because what tends to happen is if something's economically favorable, it'll start to happen, whether there's somebody really planning it out or not. It's like the universe has its own objectives and it will recruit matter and energy to do that. I'm not saying that in a it's not like a new age thing. It's just that matter won't continue, matter and energy, they won't continue to be stupid forever because eventually something that's intelligent grabs onto some of the matter and energy and starts recruiting it to build more and more intelligent matter and energy. That's the principle of evolution. Yeah, it does use up energy in the process. It doesn't come from nowhere, but essentially something evolves the ability to grab onto energy and use it to increase its intelligence. And once it can do that and replicate, then it's able to just get smarter and smarter. It started out with the molecule, and then it was prokaryotic, and then eukaryotic, and then multicellular, bigger and bigger, more complicated multicellular, and then humans, and then collections of humans solving problems. So we're at the collections of humans, like multi-human organism that's working now. That's what nature has come up with so far to do its thing. I mean, nature will keep finding a way to increase intelligence and efficiency. And if one system doesn't achieve it, another system will come along and achieve it and use the resources of the system that did not. So as we were progressing along that line of increasing intelligence and efficiency, and I don't mean that individual humans are getting smarter. That probably stopped happening. You know, definitely stopped happening once you no longer needed to be very smart to survive, to get food, shelter, water, and reproduce. I mean, all of that stopped. But humans have become, as a collective, humans have become a lot smarter. It's kind of like the difference between an individual neuron and a whole human brain. Well, now it's the difference between an individual human and a whole collective of humans, getting more and more powerful. But anyways, coming back to like why this system is not good for us. It was essentially evolved out of a time where we didn't have the computational resources that we have now. So humans were doing the computation. So right now, you can either buy physical computers or you can use a cloud service to just like virtually spin up these computers to do whatever you want, and then you can hire somebody to write a program to do whatever you want. They can't do anything. There are still limitations. We still don't understand how to accomplish certain things. with computers, quite a few things with computers, but a massive swath of stuff that used to require a human no longer requires a human. So the schooling that was designed to essentially turn people into computers isn't really needed anymore. If you think about, well, why did they emphasize um, it's sort of like emphasizing math and grammar and things like that. It's basically teaching people to be precise, to follow instructions, to show up at a certain time when they're asked. Um, that's how American schooling is anyway. It's kind of like you have to show up at this time, leave at this time, do your work, do it precisely. They generally don't care that much about creativity, but you must work accurately to get the high grade. Um, and that's sort of like those tasks they're accomplishing. They're actually a lot like what we would use a computer to do now, right? If you're going to be let's just say, I don't want to pick on accountants because they're actually creative at times, but I mean, if you're doing something super uh, boring, like adding up a bunch of numbers or just keeping track of this and that, it's something that a piece of software would do now, but there was a time when we needed people to do that. So the education system was set up, or it evolved, or whatever happened to kind of make it into this thing that generates people that are almost like machines. And that goes against our nature. So it causes depression. And then the country figured out, well, instead of changing what you do or changing the school system, let's say you have ADHD, instead of changing the school system so that you start to enjoy the class and you're not like always bored, we can just change the kids' neural function with the drug so that they're okay with doing stuff that's boring. So they start putting drugs into the kids, and then same thing can happen like if you're doing a job that's super boring because you're doing stuff that's boring. I mean, and it's stuff now that a computer can do, but the computer couldn't always do it. So you're depressed, right? So, okay, no problem. That can be solved with the drug. You don't actually have to change what you're doing. So people get depressed and then they get prescribed drugs too. So at least temporarily, what nature and humanity, I mean, I don't really make a distinction between nature and humanity, even though technically, semantically, there is a difference. I see it more as nature created humanity, and humanity is part of nature, whether they like it or not. But nature sort of created this machine of people that are, I mean, largely of people that are unhappy working at jobs that they don't necessarily like, but there are drugs, including even alcohol. I mean, not just like Prozac, but like there are drugs that people use to make it feel better. And then because their life is so uninteresting, there's also entertainment that people use to imagine, essentially vicariously live a life that seems to have some kind of purpose. I mean, why do people watch the Avengers? Because you can vicariously experience people overcoming obstacles, like living a life that's interesting and adventurous. I mean, that's why people watch that, and then they go back to their job and their house where they're safe, but they're essentially bored. So now that's sort of the overview. So breaking down a little bit more like how this happens and how it's going to have to stop. So right now, what people are doing is essentially buying a house that costs so much money. They generally have to pay for it for 30 years, usually on top of student loans that they developed. Either, people either have to pay to go to college, or even sometimes if you get college for free, quote for free, you still have to pay for housing or food. It tends to cost you money. And honestly, even if you could go to college for free, it's actually costing you money in terms of opportunity costs, because you probably could be doing something else that would make more money. But essentially, there's a combination of things that the system and the government will do to make it so that basically you kind of get trapped. You spend so much time, 12 years in school and 4 years in college, 16 years. You start that when you're about 6, so 20, 22 years. 22-year boot up of your life is kind of getting indoctrinated into this system. By the time that you pop out of that, you're ready to quote get a job. That's when people usually like buy a house that puts them way into debt, and then they're like stuck. A car too, probably, right? And then they're basically stuck in this system, and it's hard to get out. I'm imagining getting out would be like, in theory, just getting a job that you really love and enjoy, but that's going to be pretty hard. Well, because usually the jobs that you love and enjoy, like being an artist, they usually have sort of a they have a long ramp up time themselves on you gaining proficiency with actually doing something so well that you love that you can make money off of it. I mean, you have to be proficient to do that, and the probability of school actually teaching that is not that. So, I mean, what a lot of people do is just by the time they get out of school, they're just like, oh man, I just need a job that pays. And it used to be that the job that paid was sort of like many of the jobs that paid were sort of like sitting in a cube doing work, a lot of which now is done by a computer. But around 1999, that was actually shifting over to like jobs where you program the computer to do stuff were in extremely high demand, right? Because that's when the system figured out, and I'm not saying the system is good or bad, it just is what it is, but that's when the system was the big system of essentially it's planetary. I mean, we haven't interacted with anything so far that's like another intelligence off planet. So what I'm talking about is the planetary system that's basically becoming more and more intelligent. That thing figured out that computers can do some semi-intelligent things like better than humans can. Like might be relatively simple algorithmic stuff in 1999, but that makes a big difference. So at least for a time, I mean, these people just writing those programs to do that became very valuable. I mean, now since a lot of people can do that and do, I mean, there's billions of people in India, for example, and there's billions of people in other places too, China, whatever, and they can all be trained to do programming. So there's a massive amount of people that can do programming now. So it's not such a big deal in terms of demand because there's plenty of supply. But that became a thing. People started essentially offloading a lot of those tasks that were done by humans onto machines. Okay, and I'd say from 1999 up until like 2015 or something, that was just going on. Around 2015, there's a new level of machine learning and AI that's starting to come online, and it was dependent on also big data existing. But that's taking this replacement to another level. So now there's some softer decision-making processes that are hard to encode algorithmically, but they can be captured with machine learning. And now those tasks also are being replaced, right? So a lot of this stuff that people used to do is getting replaced. And the stuff that was being taught in school and college is getting replaced. So what's happening is that in order to have value in this system, people are going to have to step up their game and start to become more adaptive. I don't think that's such a bad thing because we're not happy with being computers anyway, and we're not even happy with being, slightly more than a computer. I think people actually enjoy being creative. They enjoy taking risks. They enjoy going on adventures, and whoever liked school anyways, right? So we're at a point where we can be freed from that stuff, but from what I can tell, a lot of the system is still in place, just like a legacy system. because it's the parents that kind of set expectations for the kids, and they went through that whole system, and they're, so that the whole thing lags behind. But essentially now, people need to learn to move with the punches, and that's what I mean by that is, and it's something that any business person always has to do, but it's essentially looking at what's going on right now and identifying what has to be done in response to that. That's why I say move with the punches. So I mean, it's not like I obviously don't fight for a living or anything like that, but the analogy is you have to be extremely aware of the exact environment that you're in at that moment and how to deal with it. It's very different from how they teach you to do stuff in school and college. Usually what they teach you is essentially they're kind of making their life easy by teaching you fundamentals that theoretically are going to apply to everything, right? But there are really no fundamentals that are going to get you through everything with business. Now, there are fundamentals, that's great. I mean, learning some fundamentals is great, and you can actually learn them as you need them. But you have to be aware of exactly where things are at that time in order to do the right thing in business. Like, for example, when this whole COVID thing hit, it just shifted markets dramatically. All of a sudden, like the big cities, which had the highest real estate value, are dropping in value, and the suburbs or the countryside outside of them are rapidly increasing in value, right? And you can either cry about it because maybe your business was locally in the city and now it's losing business, or you can adjust to it rapidly and start setting up stuff further out. Whatever you need to do, start buying real estate in the suburbs or whatever you need to do to adjust to that. The ones that adjust are the ones that are going to actually come out on top. However, there is this whole factor where the government kind of steps in and decides to invoke socialism in order to save the country or whatever, as if that's actually going to work. It won't, but I guess that's a whole different topic. Anyways, that's the basic point I wanted to pull out. Just that the hope is to try to save somebody. The hope of making this video is to basically hopefully save at least one person from becoming a zombie. And by zombie, I mean you go through the whole system of being indoctrinated, and then you sort of get a job that's boring, and then do boring stuff until you die. That's sort of the hope here, because there's an alternative, and that, again, that system has to die anyway because it's so inefficient now that the universe won't allow it to exist forever. Eventually, if large swaths of humanity keep doing that system, eventually another swath of humanity that figures out that they don't have to will replace them. That's sort of how it works. You are conquered by those societies that are more intelligent than you. And if it's not conquering by physical force, it's conquering by economic power, one way or another. That's just how things work out. But the society right now, I mean, the society where humans realize that essentially the societies that realize that they need to cut down on the sort of brainless education. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's sort of a mindless education where you're teaching stuff and you don't know why you're teaching it, or you don't have any real reason to back up why it's being taught, and it's not being taught very well, and you're not adapting to the students, and you're not adapting to the times. You're not customizing it for each student. You're just like doing a bad job of setting up people's lives and then putting them into debt and then making them spend a bunch of money on things that they don't need, like higher education and a house that's just whatever. Like, that system can't go on forever. And actually, the fact that people have gotten so disconnected from their ability to survive without money is something that's still holding them in the system. And by that I mean, when we started out a while back, like in the Stone Age, we pretty much knew how to survive as a relatively small group of people. You could take probably 50 people, right, form a tribe, and the tribe could survive on its own without any dependency on like needing to have money. as history progressed on, as developments happened, right, we got to the point, and it was the nations that were advancing the fastest technologically that forgot how to do that the quickest. So by the time you get to like 1901, you got a good chunk of the world no longer knows how to survive as a small tribe. They've actually forgotten how. They know how to survive with money and economy, but they don't really know how to just survive with nature. You come all the way up to now, and people literally don't even know how to take a crap without technology. They don't know how to get food without technology. They depend on society so much that, yeah, I mean, they're literally trapped in the system. You can go back to thinking about like 1910, 1920, people working in coal mines, taking a terrible job just to survive. And you ask, like, I mean, I have family that actually owned a farm. So during the Depression, they were not at a loss for food because they owned a farm. So they were in an unusual position where they actually knew how to live off the land because they were essentially farmers. But for the people that weren't farmers, when you see people taking a really bad job, like working in a coal mine way back then that was actually dangerous and paid a very small amount of money, that's because they felt like they had no alternative, right? If they had an alternative, they could just do something. They could say, well, like, I'm not going to have a job today. I'm just going to actually grow some food and go hunting. And as some people do now, right? But they would just say, okay, I'm out of this. I'm going to go back to the land. But they did not have that option. And that kind of situation is really what creates extremely cheap labor. This whole concept of like labor that's actually too cheap. This whole concept of like minimum wage somehow saving people from working for low wages. That's not what that does. What minimum wage actually does is just eliminate jobs. Minimum wage essentially eliminates all jobs that are worth less than the minimum wage per hour value, whatever that is. And right now it's different in every state, right? But let's say somebody came in and just said minimum wage is $15 across the United States. Okay, what that actually does is just say that every job where the value of the work is less than 15 per hour exists. None of those jobs in America are going to exist anymore. And in some places like Georgia, where you can buy a house for a lot less and you can live for a lot less money than you can in other places, the typical wage for an hour is often less than 15, and all of those jobs will just disappear. And then people wonder why. Oh, well, why is this corporation outsourcing all this stuff? Well, that's because they're going to outsource it to somewhere where the value actually matches what the thing is. The value of the hour of somebody's time actually corresponds to what it's worth on the market rather than what the government mandated. Or, if illegal aliens come in, which is honestly not such a big deal as people make it out to be, but the illegal aliens tend to get hired for these jobs that have been blocked off by the government by minimum wage laws, because they don't care about minimum wage laws, because they know they're not legal anyway, and the people hire them know they're not legal anyway, so they don't have to pay a minimum wage. But anyways, minimum wage won't save people from having a skill or trying to do a job that's extremely low value. But what could save them from that is either having another skill that's high value, right? Or at least having a skill where you know how to survive. And again, I'm not saying it's necessarily practical for people to just revert back to farm life, but I'm just saying if it gets so bad that having a job is more work and less payoff than literally returning to Stone Age technology, then clearly something is wrong. If we think that we're increasing our standard of living and that is happening, then clearly something is wrong with the system. And it probably wouldn't hurt to have some basic survival skills just in case. It's as if a wall was built separating people from living off of the land directly, and that wall was basically modern society and all of our expectations, our specialization, our ability to get everything we need through money, but the possibility arises that, okay, what if the economy is so bad that getting everything through money doesn't work so well anymore? And you can see it, you can see what happens when that breaks down. That's when you have depressions and things. People have a hard time just getting the basic necessities, and they don't know how to do it on their own. And what tends to happen is, yeah, I mean, during depressions, people do tend to perhaps learn how to do some gardening and stuff to try to save their lives. Um, but maybe people should be embracing that kind of mentality and pushing up the technology on that kind of stuff. Like maybe people should be pushing the technology on sustainable living, essentially being able to live off the grid. And that doesn't mean actually needing to live off the grid, always living off the grid, but suppose you have solar cells that can give you power if the power goes out, if you're not paying for the power. Suppose you know how to collect rain. And this is actually, I'm going to put this in a different video because it's a whole different subject. The subject of this video is only that evolution has pushed people into a role that many people do not enjoy anymore, and it's not really that productive either. And if you look at the natural progression of an American through the whole system of getting trained, getting the job, and going through that job, and then finally getting to retirement, that's just the retirement itself. It's like all pretty boring and not that fulfilling. And we have this opportunity now to basically just go on the internet and learn stuff. So what are the solutions to all those problems? It's not really that complicated. I mean, it's literally illegal to not go to school. I mean, the parents it would be considered, a crime for the parents to not put their kids through this indoctrination system, which that's actually kind of frightening when you think about it. But I know that was originally done perhaps to try to make sure everybody has a chance, but that's not what it actually does now. It actually just ensures that everybody is indoctrinated by a system that a government created that no longer fits the overall system that well. But anyways, if we're just imagining what a better system would be, you certainly could have some kind of educational help. I mean, it just should be adapted to the person, right? I mean, if somebody enjoys the subject or is drawn to it, then that's basically where their education should focus. And it should be more like bringing in a coach to help an athlete get better and better, rather than sort of force feeding the same structure to a large number of people. I mean, a good coach comes in and says, here are the strengths of the person, here are the weaknesses, and here's what they want to achieve. I'm going to consider all of that and then customize the program directly for that person. That's closer to what should be done with all humans. And, we have the technology and the infrastructure to make that kind of thing more possible. I mean, you might be saying, well, then you'd have to have a teacher for every single kid. No, not really. I mean, you don't, even if one teacher were coaching 20 students, I mean, if that teacher were leveraging the fact that they can actually learn independently if they enjoy what they're doing, and they've got the internet to provide all the information and to present it to them. They've also got media to present it to them in good ways. The kids can actually learn a lot. It doesn't have to be like one person talking to 25 people all the same message like it has been originally, like when I went to school, which was a long time ago. But I mean, still now, it's essentially a teacher talking to 25 people, telling them all the same message. Well, for one thing, you can have one person talking to 20,000 people, if it's a message that's essentially universal, you could have even one person make a video that goes to a million people, right? If it's something that's universal, right? But what the teachers that are being paid to work with individuals should be doing is more like coaching, coming in and doing specific things that are customized to those children, and it doesn't have to be for the whole 8 hours a day. They don't need 8 hours a day of somebody looking over their shoulder talking to me. In fact, yeah, teachers don't even really do that now. But for the whole class, they don't even watch over them 8 hours a day. Usually, the teacher's working on something else part of the time while the students are doing their work, right? But what the teacher needs to do is like adjust everything to the student. Come in, find what the student's strength is, amplify it, give them an opportunity to learn more about things that they're interested in doing so that they can become competitive and not just, it used to just be, well, you have to be competitive with people who are completely lazy and not doing anything perhaps, right? But now you have to be competitive with machines. I mean, you have to be competitive with algorithms to start with. Fairly simple algorithms is what it started out with, but now you have to be competitive against machine learning style stuff too, which is somewhat more adaptive. It's still not like a human brain. So you have to use that adaptivity that humans have that's currently above machines, and it won't be above computers forever. I mean, eventually computers will develop that also. Well, people will make it so that computers develop another level of intelligence, and then that level will no longer be a viable job. And so if you look at the span of intelligences, and it's funny because some of this stuff is not that intuitive. I mean, the when you go to school, they put people into categories. At least this is what I saw when I was in school. They'd say, okay, this person's like on a college track because they're smart. This person's on a vocational track because they're, quote, not smart. So the vocational track ends up doing plumbing, and the college track ends up learning some really theoretical stuff for college. Oh, okay, you got to learn calculus because you're going to college. But here's the irony, like plumbing is worth just as much as knowing calculus. It's actually oftentimes worth more. So the plumbers are going off and making money, and the ones who learn calculus are going off and wasting a bunch of time. Like a lot of people that learn calculus don't even ever use it, but they spend a lot of time learning it. And then going to college and learning more of it, and then eventually getting to the point where they're supposed to get a job that they were supposed to enjoy through the college, but they realized they didn't enjoy it that much. And meanwhile, the plumber and the electrician who do something that's absolutely critical. I mean, people need plumbing and they need their electricity done. They have the potential to actually make more. So it's kind of like the school has a system where they take some of the people that are, quote, smart and totally trick them into doing stuff that's basically a waste of time. So maybe those people aren't so smart if they got tricked that bad, but I mean, the cards got stacked against them. They're literally taking the people that measured with a higher test score and sending them down a rabbit hole to do stuff that's kind of useless. But anyways, so no matter where you are on the and you know, I don't think tests that they give you in school that measure your, quote, aptitude or whatever are not really measuring your aptitude. So maybe it's all poetic justice that stuff is going to collapse and they're sending you down rabbit holes, sort of. But anyways, no matter where you are on that scale of like aptitude that they try to measure in school, it's sort of a bell curve. Jobs are disappearing and going to computers. Now, I would say at the extreme end, like if at the end where it requires the highest level of thought, well, actually no. I mean, the end of that scale, that test taking scale, is actually just the highest level of test taking, which that has not been consumed by computers yet. But honestly, the stuff they test you with, which is usually like math and reading comprehension, I mean, honestly, that's going to be the next block to fall, when you think about it, right? I mean, right now it's what machine learning is doing is essentially doing, it's able to like recognize patterns that are very difficult to encode algorithmically, and doing that based on example, and that's opening up a lot of other possibilities. But machines still aren't very good. Computers still aren't very good at actually reading comprehension, but basic comprehension and being able to sort of pull information back out of a paragraph, which is what I seems to be what people test in standardized tests a lot, just like comprehension and doing math problems. That's probably the next brick that'll fall as artificial intelligence gets more and more advanced. It doesn't mean that they'll be able to think creatively yet, right? But that's probably the next thing to fall off. So anyways, my point was, people are still kind of safe at the end. If they have high reading comprehension and math skills, they're still safe now from having their skills actually taken away by a computer. But they're probably the next on the horizon. By the way, I'm not saying that's going to happen next year. It's actually an extremely complex problem to solve technologically, to develop something that can do that. So I'm not saying it's going to happen next year, but I mean, it probably will happen that at some point AI will have good reading comprehension. Okay. So yeah, anyways, at that high side of the test taking side, skills probably not about to be taken over. But my point is, for the rest of it, in terms of just doing tasks that are information related, they are at risk. Like a lot of the information related tasks that can be encoded as algorithms, those were the first to go. Like in 1999, 2000, that's when that was all peaking out, and those were the first to go. And then now by the time you get to 2014, 2015, there's more going. So wherever you happen to lie on that chart, and it doesn't matter where you are on that chart, like there are people that are ridiculously successful all over that chart because it doesn't actually measure success. As I understand it, studies have actually been done that success is not correlated to the grades that you make in school. So it's not an indication of actual success anyway. But no matter where you are on that chart, your job could be taken by a machine. Some of those jobs are more stable than others. So think about something like a bouncer. That's a stable job because you have to be there to do it, and generally people want a person to do it. Something like a psychiatrist is still a stable job. Well, it's unfortunately a stable job because people need it so much because of this system, but they also tend to want a person to do it. I mean, could you have software that sort of acts as a psychiatrist? Yeah, probably, but it wouldn't necessarily be as good as a human. Plumber, electrician, those are great jobs because robotics is not a very well developed technology. And if you imagine how advanced a robot would have to actually be to do something like a plumber or electrician does, it's ridiculously advanced. None of the robots are there. Not even close, right? One of the jobs that's been completely replaced, for example, by computers is stockbroker, right? Stockbroker used to be a pretty respectable job. That was like a big deal. Oh, I'm a stockbroker. I'm making tons of money right now. I mean, now why would anybody actually use a stockbroker when you could just click a button and have it done? I mean, theoretically, if a stockbroker actually gave you advice, it would be useful, but that's not really what stockbrokers do. And even if they do, they don't do it well, right? So, I mean, the person is still responsible for the decisions they make, whether there's a broker involved or not. So, that's just like an example of a job that disappeared, and obviously there's lots more on the way. So, people are going to have to learn how to do the things that are more creative, because those are the jobs that are going to be remaining. there's sort of a couple directions you can go. It's either a job that requires more intelligence than a machine has, or more just straight up comprehension ability than a machine has. So there are some jobs like that. I mean, or it requires more creativity than the computers have. You know, if you're an artist, musician, movie maker, again, computers are not very good at actually making movies. I'm not saying that it's impossible for a computer to make a movie. It actually can, but it wouldn't be a very good movie currently. Um, so creativity, the the high comprehension set or the higher level like philosophy, those are still left. There are some tasks that are kind of like they're about to be absorbed by machines, but they haven't yet. Like there are some jobs that, for example, Amazon gives to people, and I don't mean like the high level people, the quote high level people at Amazon. I mean like Amazon actually employs like armies of people to do menial stuff, like moving packages around, while they simultaneously are developing robots to do it. And once the robots are able to do it, then those people won't be needed to do that job anymore. And I'm not saying like that's not a very good job anyway. Like for that job to disappear, I mean, I mean, some people might be thinking, "Oh man, they're replacing people with robots." I mean, those jobs are so boring. It might be better off for robots to be doing them anyway. And then if you ask like, "Well, what about people?" But people need to make a living somehow too. That's why I'm saying people need to start focusing on doing things that they know machines can't do, and start focusing on learning how to survive directly, because it's going to be more efficient. It's going to probably continue to get more efficient as more and more jobs get absorbed by machines. It's going to get more and more efficient to basically go out and grow a piece of food and eat it, compared to trying to find some place in the system where the contribution can happen enough that it can pay for a piece of food for you to eat. I mean, that sounds a little scary, I guess, when I say it, but it's not that bad. It's just saying like there's gonna come a time where people might have to take care of themselves. Some people might have to take care of themselves, and it wouldn't hurt to kind of develop some skills to do that. Just think about it. It's really a matter of like thinking about how to live efficiently and getting back to recognizing that humans are just one way of solving this problem of getting stuff done. I mean, historically, it has been the case that whenever you see something getting done computationally, intelligently, it's like always a human doing it. It's almost always a human doing it. Now, a lot of that computation and part of that intelligence is going to get absorbed by machines. It's going to change what is required, and that's going to totally change the job landscape. And at some point, you've got to accept the reality that part of being a human isn't contributing to that system. It's more like enjoying your life. This is my hope anyway, is that people can enjoy their life, because if you project out, there are no guarantees. Humanity does not have to go on, and I'm not talking about the possibility that they could destroy themselves. I'm talking about the possibility that they could replace themselves. I mean, most people who are futurists, for logical reasons, see a future where humans have either replaced or augmented themselves to the point where they're radically different. I mean, I'm going a little bit off subject, but if you use that thinking all the way out to the point where humans have been replaced by the next evolution of intelligent life forms or superorganisms, is probably going a little bit too far to just plan out the rest of your day. It's probably going a little too far, but it's helpful just to consider it as an extreme point. Like if you consider two extreme points, the point at which we were in the Stone Age, like right before technology exploded. Okay, if you look at Stone Age, then you look at where we are now, and then just for the sake of imagining what's going on, imagining something where humans have actually become obsolete. So now the universe is using other more advanced systems. In other words, you know, don't take it personally, but like most of the substrates of intelligence that the universe uses to do stuff, they don't really last forever, or even if they last, their role changes dramatically. Mitochondria used to be bacteria living their own life, and then they got absorbed into cells, and now they're like power systems for cells. I mean, I don't want to say that people are going to become power systems like in the Matrix or anything like that. That wouldn't even be efficient. But the idea is the roles can change over time. The brain is essentially a computer that evolved to solve problems for people. A new intelligence could evolve that makes human brains obsolete. So it's not a big scary thing. It's just like how nature works. It started out with molecules and bacteria, cells, prokaryotic, multicellular, human brains, collections of humans. That won't be the end of the evolution. It's going to keep going. Things are going to keep evolving, and one day, whatever that is, we'll be able to look back and say, oh, that human society was an interesting part of the chain of evolution where we or it is deep in the future. But anyways, if you just use that as an endpoint that's in the future, you know that jobs are going to be changed radically, and it helps to kind of predict which jobs are going to fall off most quickly. So if you're planning out your life, you can say, okay, if I can estimate that it's going to take like 100 to 200 years for technology to develop that would replace this, then that's pretty safe bet in terms of it just being totally eradicated by some other intelligence. And then you want to think very much in the present when you're deciding what you want to do. Boom, okay, now look around me at the market, the exact market. How can I respond to the exact market? What do people want right now? What will they want to pay for right now? Or if you're an artist, what will move people right now? Movie maker, what would people want to watch? What would be relevant right now? So you're going to want to look at the exact situation that you're in. This is entrepreneurial skill, the ability to look at exactly where you are in the market. So whether you're something like a musician or an artist or an entrepreneur, those skills are actually, they have some similarities in the sense that when you match up with what society wants right at that moment, that's how you can sell successfully. And you might say, well, I'm an artist, so I'm not concerned about selling. But I'm not even saying, when I say sell, I don't even necessarily mean making money. I mean appealing to a large number of people. And you can make money by doing that. And you probably won't make money if you don't do that. But it's not even really about the money. It's about successfully producing something that appeals to people. Same thing, whether an entrepreneur is making money or not, they're not going to have a product that makes a splash unless it appeals to people. It has to be relevant to that time and that place. So you have to learn to look around, adapt, provide things that are relevant, up to date to that time, and be competitive with everything else. That's something that generally is not taught in school. They don't teach you that in school. They don't teach you to be competitive and to adapt to everything that's going on. They tend to take concepts that are more relatively universal. I mean, I know why they're doing it. You know, you can teach somebody reading comprehension of English, and that hasn't changed for very much for 100 years. So you can keep. It feels like, oh, it's this beautiful thing. Everybody needs to know it. So I'll just keep teaching this. Same thing with math. The math that they're teaching in school hasn't really changed for a really long time. Physics, same deal, right? So you can teach this stuff. I know quantum mechanics and all that changes, but that's not necessarily what they're teaching in school, regular school for physics. Anyways, and even quantum mechanics hasn't changed significantly in terms of what you would use from it practically. As a regular person, your knowledge of quantum physics that is required to get through your regular life hasn't really changed that much over the last 50 years or so. So anyways, these things are relatively constant, so they can be taught. You can develop a lesson plan, get it all squared away, and kind of like not even change what's being taught for like large amounts of time, because you feel like those things are universal and relatively timeless. Yeah, I get it. I get why, but to teach somebody to be an entrepreneur is more about teaching them the psychology of it, because it's a challenging psychology. Being able to deal with failure and success, but being able to deal with a lot of failure. Again, in school, it's like, oh, they want you to get it. If you get A's on this, if you didn't make mistakes, got an A, then you did good. But if you made mistakes, then it's bad. Even if you're more creative, if you make more mistakes, you're going to get lower grades. You're going to be considered inferior. But I think it's completely fair poetic justice that it's the creative people, regardless of the grades. It's creative ones, or the ones that are just realistic, not the ones that are necessarily getting the good grades that are going to come out on top. Realistic just means look to solve a problem that people have, not to solve a problem that a teacher gave to you. That's an artificial problem. When a teacher gives you a test, that whole test is an artificial problem. I mean, I see people spending day after day, hour after hour, day after day, year after year solving artificial problems. Right? Everything that teacher gave to you to study, every test to prepare for, those are artificial problems. What about real problems? If you develop the ability to solve real problems, so provide people with things that they actually need, that's entrepreneurial. If you develop the ability to solve your own survival problems, that's essentially a return to nature. That's you being able to, grow your own food, build your own house. I mean, I think either of those things are extremely valuable. But solving an artificial problem, I know what the reasoning is. Oh, if you solve this artificial problem, then you'll know how to solve problems in your real life. That's the claim anyway. But we've gotten to a point where you might as well be solving real problems as you're learning, because there's not there's not infinite time. And if you want to train yourself, like if you want to give yourself artificial problems to essentially train yourself up so that then you can attack some interesting real world problems that you're interested in, go for it. But that's going to feel more natural anyways. I mean, you're going to know when you're doing that. It's not going to feel like you're wasting time. It's not going to feel like a chore, because your brain was developed to be a problem-solving machine, and an intelligence machine. That's how evolution built it. When your brain doesn't understand what the purpose of something is, it will start to resist, and that's when you have the boredom and the depression and all that stuff that people tend to have while they're in school. Anyways, I'm going to end this video now. I think I've gotten some points across, even though I'm not even going to state what they are. They're in there somewhere. If you enjoy this, please do the thumbs up and subscribe. It'll help it get out to more people. I'm literally trying to help people enjoy their lives. I mean, we're essentially in this time period where humans have a role, and a big role, and it's gonna it might go forever, who knows, but we're in an interesting point in human evolution. We could have fun with it if we made decisions optimally. So we could have fun with it and be productive at the same time. But if we continue to use this old, outdated system that the government and educational institutions are pushing, then we're not going to have fun with this time that we have as a collective human superorganism. So, yeah, that's it. And thanks for watching.